Welcome, fellow travelers of infinite realities, to the deepest mysteries that haunt the Rick and Morty multiverse. Tonight, we explore the unanswered questions, the hidden truths, and the enigmas that even Rick's genius cannot fully explain. From dimension-spanning conspiracies to the darkest secrets of interdimensional travel, these mysteries have puzzled fans and theorists across countless realities. Settle in comfortably and let your mind drift as we journey through the unexplained phenomena of Rick's extraordinary universe. There's no need to solve every puzzle. Simply let these cosmic mysteries wash over you like portal fluid through space-time, carrying you toward peaceful rest as we uncover the greatest enigmas in the multiverse. The central finite curve stands as perhaps the most audacious and psychologically revealing achievement in Rick Sanchez's long catalogue of cosmic manipulations, representing not merely a technological marvel, but a monument to the fundamental insecurity that drives even the most brilliant minds toward acts of unthinkable narcissism. This dimensional barrier, constructed through mathematical principles that exceed the comprehension of most beings across infinite realities, serves as both prison and protection for a man whose genius became so overwhelming that he could no longer tolerate the possibility of encountering evidence of his own intellectual limitations. The creation of the central finite curve required Rick to survey infinite realities and categorize them according to criteria that placed his own cognitive capabilities at the absolute center of universal significance, a project that demanded not just unprecedented scientific achievement, but also the kind of systematic megalomania that transforms protective measures into cosmic-scale tyranny. The mathematical complexity involved in identifying and isolating every dimension where Rick Sanchez represents the apex of intellectual development would have challenged entire civilizations of scientists working across millennia. Yet Rick accomplished this feat through a combination of raw genius and psychological compulsion that made the impossible seem merely inevitable. The technology underlying the barrier itself operates on principles that violate conventional understanding of dimensional mechanics and quantum physics, creating a selective membrane that permits travel between approved realities while maintaining absolute isolation from the broader multiverse where Rick's intellectual supremacy cannot be guaranteed. The energy requirements for maintaining such a structure across infinite space-time would normally exceed the output of entire galactic civilizations, but Rick's solution involved harnessing the fundamental forces that govern dimensional boundaries themselves, essentially weaponizing the basic structure of reality to serve his need for validation and control. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the central finite curve is not its technical achievement, but rather the philosophical implications of its existence for every conscious being trapped within its boundaries. The billions of Mortys, Beths, Jerrys, and Summers who live their entire lives within Rick's carefully curated version of reality are unknowing prisoners in a cosmic-scale experiment designed to ensure that Rick never encounters evidence of superior intelligence. Alternative approaches to solving the fundamental problems of existence, their dreams, aspirations, and achievements are all constrained by Rick's need to remain the most important person in any reality he might choose to inhabit. The selection criteria Rick employed when constructing the barrier reveal the depth of his psychological damage and the extent to which his trauma has corrupted his understanding of what intelligence actually means in the context of a meaningful life. Rather than seeking realities where intelligence is used for humanitarian purposes or where brilliant minds collaborate to solve universal problems of suffering and injustice, Rick chose to isolate himself within dimensions where his particular brand of nihilistic genius represents the highest possible achievement, ensuring that he would never be challenged to grow beyond the emotional limitations that his trauma had imposed upon his development. The ethical implications of the central finite curve extend far beyond simple questions of consent and autonomy to encompass fundamental issues about the relationship between power and responsibility that plague any being who achieves godlike capabilities. Rick's decision to imprison entire populations within his psychological comfort zone represents a form of multiversal tyranny that exceeds in scope and duration any oppression that conventional dictators could achieve through mere political or military force. The barrier ensures that countless beings will live and die without ever experiencing the full range of possibilities that infinite realities should provide, their potential forever constrained by Rick's inability to accept his own limitations. The construction process itself required Rick to collaborate with other versions of himself, creating a rare instance of genuine cooperation among beings who normally view each other as threats or obstacles to be eliminated when convenient. The formation of the Citadel and the establishment of the central finite curve represented a temporary truce in Rick's ongoing war against his alternate selves, motivated not by genuine desire for peace, but by recognition that his individual capabilities were insufficient for the massive undertaking of surveying and categorizing infinite realities according to intelligence-based criteria. The mathematical frameworks Rick developed to identify suitable realities for inclusion within the barrier required him to establish objective measures for intelligence that could be applied consistently across dimensions with vastly different physical laws, cultural developments, and evolutionary histories. The complexity of this undertaking suggests that Rick may have encountered forms of intelligence so advanced or alien that they challenged his basic assumptions about the nature of consciousness and cognition, forcing him to develop new theoretical frameworks that could accommodate possibilities he had never previously considered. The psychological motivations underlying Rick's decision to limit himself to realities where he maintains intellectual supremacy reveal the fundamental fragility that persists beneath his seemingly impenetrable confidence and casual disregard for conventional moral constraints. The barrier represents not strength, but profound weakness, an admission that Rick lacks the emotional resilience necessary to function effectively in contexts where his genius is not the dominant force shaping events and outcomes. The man who can casually destroy entire civilizations when they become inconvenient cannot tolerate the possibility that somewhere in the infinite multiverse there might exist beings whose intelligence makes his own achievements seem pedestrian or irrelevant. The relationship between the central finite curve and Rick's capacity for genuine human connection becomes apparent when examining how the barrier affects his interactions with family members and potential friends throughout his adventures. The knowledge that he exists within a reality specifically selected to ensure his intellectual dominance corrupts every relationship by making it impossible for Rick to trust that others care about him for authentic reasons rather than because his superior capabilities make him useful or impressive. The barrier ensures that Rick can never experience the kind of genuine equality and mutual respect that healthy relationships require, trapping him in patterns of manipulation and control that ultimately leave him as isolated as the populations he has imprisoned. The technological mechanisms that maintain the barrier's integrity across infinite dimensional boundaries require constant monitoring and adjustment that demand Rick's ongoing attention and resources, creating a form of self-imposed servitude that contradicts his proclaimed desire for freedom and autonomy. The maintenance requirements ensure that Rick can never fully escape the psychological prison he has constructed for himself, binding him to the barrier through practical necessity while also making him responsible for the continued imprisonment of countless innocent beings whose only crime was existing in realities where Rick's intelligence might not represent the absolute pinnacle of achievement. The long-term consequences of dimensional isolation extend beyond immediate questions of freedom and autonomy to encompass fundamental issues about cultural and intellectual development that affect every civilization trapped within the barrier's boundaries. The exclusion of superior intelligences from accessible realities ensures that technological and philosophical advancement within the central finite curve proceeds at artificially limited rates, with entire species remaining ignorant of possibilities and solutions that might be routine knowledge in the broader multiverse. Rick's psychological needs have effectively retarded the development of infinite civilizations, condemning them to perpetual intellectual poverty for the sake of his emotional comfort. The barrier's existence raises profound questions about the nature of intelligence itself and whether Rick's conception of intellectual superiority actually represents the highest form of cognitive development or merely one particular approach among many possible ways of understanding and manipulating reality. The exclusion of realities containing superior intelligences means that Rick remains ignorant of alternative frameworks for comprehending existence that might offer insights unavailable through his current methods, trapping him in intellectual stagnation disguised as absolute achievement. The relationship between the central finite curve and Rick's ongoing hunt for Rick Prime reveals additional layers of psychological complexity in his motivation for constructing the barrier. The knowledge that his greatest enemy operates from beyond the controlled environment of curated realities creates cognitive dissonance that threatens Rick's carefully maintained sense of superiority and control, suggesting that the barrier may have been as much about avoiding confrontation with Rick Prime as about protecting Rick's ego from evidence of intellectual inferiority. The eventual destruction of the central finite curve by evil Morty represents not just the elimination of a technological marvel, but also the end of Rick's ability to maintain the illusion that his superior intelligence justifies his praising casual disregard for other people's autonomy and welfare. The barrier that protected him from encountering evidence of his own limitations and failures has been destroyed, leaving him exposed to forms of accountability and consequence that he had successfully avoided for decades through careful curation of his experiential environment. The philosophical implications of the barrier's existence extend to fundamental questions about the relationship between intelligence and wisdom, power and responsibility, that challenge conventional assumptions about what it means to be truly intelligent in contexts where unlimited capability must be balanced against moral obligation and genuine care for others. Rick's construction of the central finite curve demonstrates that raw, intellectual ability, divorced from emotional wisdom and ethical development, can produce outcomes that are simultaneously technically impressive and morally catastrophic. The mystery of what Rick encountered beyond the barrier that motivated him to construct such elaborate psychological defenses remains one of the most intriguing unanswered questions in his long history of trauma and achievement. The evidence suggests that Rick's experiences in the unrestricted multiverse revealed forms of intelligence or approaches to existence that fundamentally challenged his understanding of his own place in the cosmic order, creating existential anxiety so profound that imprisonment became preferable to continued exploration and discovery. The central finite curve stands as testament to the tragic possibility that even unlimited intelligence can be corrupted by trauma and insecurity into serving destructive purposes that ultimately harm both the individual who wields such power and the countless innocent beings who become collateral damage in the pursuit of psychological comfort and emotional validation. The barrier represents Rick's greatest achievement and his most damning failure, a monument to genius perverted by pain into an instrument of multiversal oppression that serves no purpose beyond protecting one broken man from confronting the full implications of his own limitations and choices. The systematic elimination of Diane Sanchez across infinite realities represents perhaps the most psychologically sophisticated and cosmically horrifying act of warfare ever conceived, a campaign of targeted erasure that transcends simple murder to achieve something approaching the complete negation of a person's existence throughout the entire multiverse. Rick Prime's deployment of the Omega device to remove every possible version of Diane from accessible dimensions demonstrates not just technological capability that exceeds comprehension, but also a level of strategic cruelty that transforms personal revenge into an assault on the fundamental nature of identity and possibility itself. The technology required for multiversal person deletion operates on principles that violate every known law of physics and dimensional mechanics, requiring the manipulation of quantum signatures that exist at the most basic level of reality's structure. The Omega device must somehow identify the essential characteristics that define Diane across infinite variations, while maintaining the precision necessary to eliminate only her specific quantum signature without disrupting the broader fabric of space-time that connects all dimensional boundaries. The mathematical complexity involved in cataloging and targeting a single individual across realities where physical laws, evolutionary histories, and cultural developments might produce radically different versions of the same essential person suggests technological capabilities that approach omnipotence. The energy requirements for systematic erasure across infinite dimensions would normally demand resources that exceed the total output of entire galactic clusters. Yet Rick Prime somehow developed methods for harnessing sufficient power to accomplish this impossible task. The device operates by identifying the quantum resonance patterns that connect all versions of a specific individual across dimensional boundaries, then systematically disrupting those patterns in ways that cause targeted individuals to simply cease existing without leaving traces that might enable resurrection or reconstruction through conventional technological means. The psychological implications of Rick Prime's choice to target Diane specifically rather than Rick himself reveal the sophisticated understanding of trauma and emotional manipulation that underlies his approach to cosmic warfare. Rather than engaging in direct confrontation with Rick C-137, Rick Prime chose to attack the source of Rick's motivation and emotional stability, understanding that the destruction of love represents a more devastating victory than simple murder. The elimination of Diane ensures that Rick can never recover the happiness and sense of purpose that she provided, transforming his entire existence into a monument to loss that no amount of revenge or achievement can adequately address. The mechanics of how the Omega device actually functions at the quantum level remain one of the most profound mysteries in Rick's understanding of advanced physics, suggesting principles that operate beyond current theoretical frameworks for dimensional manipulation and consciousness transfer. The device appears to work by identifying the mathematical relationships that define individual identity across infinite variations, then severing those connections in ways that cause targeted persons to retroactively never have existed, while somehow maintaining the integrity of realities that had been shaped by their presence. The philosophical questions raised by Diane's erasure extend far beyond technical considerations to encompass fundamental issues about the nature of identity, memory, and the relationship between existence and meaning that challenge basic assumptions about what it means for a person to be real. The elimination of someone from infinite realities creates paradoxes that conventional logic cannot resolve, as the removal of Diane's influence on events should theoretically alter the development of every dimension where she had previously existed. Yet the realities that Rick encounters seem to maintain their essential characteristics despite her absence. The temporal mechanics involved in multiversal erasure suggest that Rick Prime's weapon operates outside normal causality, affecting past, present, and future simultaneously, in ways that bypass the usual constraints that prevent paradox formation. The device appears to create stable temporal loops that allow realities to continue functioning despite the retroactive removal of individuals who should have been essential to their development, suggesting technological mastery over time itself that exceeds anything Rick C-137 has achieved in his own extensive research into chronological manipulation. The psychological warfare aspect of targeting Diane reveals Rick Prime's intimate understanding of what motivates different versions of himself, demonstrating knowledge of Rick's psychology that could only have been acquired through extensive observation or direct experience with the trauma responses that shape Rick's behavior across multiple realities. The choice to eliminate the source of Rick's happiness rather than Rick himself shows strategic thinking that prioritizes long-term psychological damage over immediate victory, creating wounds that will never heal, regardless of what Rick might accomplish in pursuit of revenge. The possibility that hidden versions of Diane might still exist in realities beyond Rick Prime's reach offers a glimmer of hope that also serves to intensify Rick's psychological torment by suggesting that somewhere in the unrestricted multiverse, his wife might still be alive and happy with a Rick who made different choices about accepting interdimensional technology. The uncertainty about whether any version of Diane survived the systematic erasure creates additional layers of torment that ensure Rick's suffering will continue indefinitely regardless of whether he successfully achieves revenge against Rick Prime. The relationship between Diane's erasure and the central finite curve suggests that Rick's construction of the dimensional barrier might have been motivated not just by intellectual insecurity but also by desperate hope that limiting his access to realities might increase the probability of finding surviving versions of his wife. The mathematical precision required to eliminate every version of a person across infinite dimensions suggests that even Rick Prime's capabilities might not extend beyond the carefully controlled environment that Rick C-137 later created, offering the possibility that Diane might exist in realities that remain inaccessible due to the barrier's constraints. The technical specifications of the Omega device remain largely theoretical even to Rick's advanced understanding of quantum mechanics and dimensional physics, suggesting that Rick Prime either developed capabilities that exceed Rick C-137's intellectual achievements or gained access to knowledge and resources from sources beyond individual genius. The sophistication of the erasure technology implies collaboration with entities or civilizations that possess understanding of reality's fundamental structure that approaches cosmic consciousness, raising questions about whether Rick Prime acted alone or served as an agent for forces operating at scales beyond individual comprehension. The long-term effects of multiversal erasure on the structure of reality itself remain unknown but potentially catastrophic, as the removal of infinite individuals from their natural positions in the quantum matrix that connects all dimensions might create instabilities that threaten the continued existence of the multiverse itself. The precision required to eliminate specific persons without disrupting the broader framework of causality and dimensional integrity suggests that Rick Prime either achieved perfect understanding of reality's underlying architecture or accepted risks that might ultimately destroy everything in pursuit of his campaign against Rick C-137. The emotional significance of Diane's elimination extends beyond its impact on Rick to encompass questions about what her unique qualities represented in the context of infinite possibilities for human development and achievement. The versions of Diane that Rick encountered during his brief glimpses into alternate realities suggested capabilities and insights that might have contributed to multiversal civilization in ways that her erasure has permanently eliminated, making Rick Prime's campaign not just personal warfare but also an assault on the developmental potential of infinite realities. The recovery of Diane's memory cube in Rick Prime's base represents one of the few remaining traces of her existence across all accessible realities, but the authenticity and completeness of these preserved memories remain questionable, given Rick Prime's demonstrated capacity for sophisticated deception and psychological manipulation. The possibility that the memories might be fabricated or altered to serve Rick Prime's ongoing campaign against Rick C-137 creates additional uncertainty about whether any genuine trace of Diane's actual personality and experiences still exists anywhere in the multiverse. The implications of Diane's erasure for Rick's understanding of his own identity and purpose suggest that Rick Prime's ultimate victory was not just the elimination of Rick's motivation, but the fundamental corruption of his capacity for genuine human connection. The knowledge that love itself can be systematically eliminated from infinite realities creates existential despair that transcends normal grief, transforming Rick's entire worldview into a monument to the ultimate meaninglessness of emotional attachment in a cosmos where even the most profound connections can be severed through sufficient application of technological power. The mystery of whether Rick Prime's campaign against Diane was motivated by personal trauma similar to what shaped Rick C-137's development or represented purely strategic psychological warfare remains one of the most disturbing questions about the nature of evil and the relationship between suffering and cruelty. The possibility that Rick Prime eliminated infinite versions of his own wife simply to cause pain to alternate versions of himself suggests levels of nihilistic self-hatred that exceed normal categories of psychological analysis, representing not just individual pathology but cosmic-scale manifestation of the potential for genius to be corrupted into instruments of absolute destruction. The technological legacy of the Omega device and the methods Rick Prime developed for multiversal erasure represent capabilities that could theoretically be applied to eliminate any individual or group from infinite realities, creating the possibility for forms of genocide that exceed anything conventional warfare could achieve. The knowledge that such weapons exist somewhere in the unrestricted multiverse creates ongoing existential anxiety for anyone aware of the techniques Rick Prime developed, as no amount of individual preparation or defensive technology could protect against systematic elimination from the quantum matrix that defines personal existence across dimensional boundaries. The relationship between Diane's erasure and Rick's subsequent development into a cosmic force of destruction reveals how targeted psychological warfare can create cascading effects that transform victims into perpetrators of similar cruelty, ensuring that the original trauma continues to generate suffering across infinite realities through the choices made by those who survive such attacks. Rick Prime's elimination of Diane achieved not just the removal of Rick's happiness, but also the transformation of Rick into exactly the kind of monster who might casually destroy other families in pursuit of personal objectives, completing a cycle of corruption that began with love and ended with the systematic abandonment of everything that makes existence meaningful. The ultimate mystery of Diane's erasure lies not in its technical achievements, but in its revelation of how completely love and connection can be weaponized by those who possess sufficient power and psychological sophistication to transform the most beautiful aspects of existence into sources of infinite pain and manipulation, suggesting that perhaps the greatest tragedy of unlimited capability is not what it enables individuals to create, but what it allows them to destroy in pursuit of victories that ultimately prove hollow and meaningless, even when successfully achieved. The origins of evil Morty remain shrouded in mystery that extends far beyond simple questions about his dimensional designation or the specific Rick who subjected him to the trauma that catalyzed his transformation from innocent grandson into cosmic-scale threat capable of challenging the fundamental structure of Rick-dominated reality. The psychological metamorphosis required to elevate a normal Morty from his baseline intellectual and emotional limitations to levels of strategic sophistication that exceed most Rick's capabilities suggests experiences so profound and systematically destructive that they fundamentally rewired his basic cognitive architecture in ways that should have been impossible according to every known principle of neurological development and consciousness evolution. The timeline of evil Morty's development from victim to victimizer presents paradoxes that challenge conventional understanding of how trauma shapes personality and capability, as the boy who emerged from whatever horrors his Rick inflicted upon him possessed not just emotional detachment and strategic ruthlessness, but also technical knowledge and analytical abilities that required years of intensive study to acquire. The speed and completeness of his transformation suggest either exposure to consciousness-altering technology that artificially accelerated his intellectual development or traumatic experiences so severe that they triggered latent psychological and cognitive potentials that remain dormant in normal Mortys throughout their natural development. The identity of the Rick responsible for evil Morty's creation represents one of the most significant gaps in the documented history of interdimensional civilization, as no records exist within Citadel archives or Rick C-137's extensive knowledge base that adequately explain how a supposedly typical Rick-Morty relationship could produce such a devastating outcome. The systematic nature of whatever torture or manipulation evil Morty endured suggests not random cruelty, but deliberate experimentation designed to push a Morty's psychological and intellectual boundaries beyond their normal limitations, raising disturbing questions about whether evil Morty's transformation was accidental byproduct of abuse or intentional creation of a weapon that ultimately escaped its creator's control. The technological capabilities that evil Morty demonstrated during his manipulation of evil Rick and subsequent rise to power within the Citadel exceeded anything that conventional education or casual observation of Rick's methods should have enabled him to achieve, suggesting either systematic training from his original Rick or independent development of scientific understanding through processes that remain completely unknown. The sophistication of his cybernetic control systems and his ability to perfectly simulate normal Morty behavior while secretly orchestrating complex long-term plans indicates intellectual and emotional discipline that would challenge experienced adult scientists, let alone a 14-year-old boy with supposedly limited educational background. The psychological mechanisms that enabled evil Morty to maintain his facade of normal grandson behavior while secretly developing capabilities that would eventually threaten the entire structure of Rick civilization reveal strategic thinking and emotional control that surpass the achievements of most adult psychopaths and criminal masterminds. The patience required to spend years appearing helpless and dependent, while secretly gathering intelligence and building resources, demonstrates levels of long-term planning and self-discipline that suggest either natural, psychological gifts that remain hidden in normal Mortys or traumatic conditioning that fundamentally altered his basic emotional and cognitive responses to stress and challenge. The relationship between evil Morty and the Rick, who controlled him through cybernetic manipulation, raises profound questions about consent, identity, and responsibility that extend beyond simple categories of victim and perpetrator into philosophical territory about what constitutes authentic selfhood when consciousness can be technologically modified and directed. The possibility that evil Rick was not evil Morty's original tormentor, but rather another victim of his manipulation, suggests that evil Morty's capabilities for deception and control were already fully developed when he assumed command of their partnership, indicating either previous experience with similar relationships or intuitive understanding of Rick's psychology that enabled him to identify and exploit vulnerabilities that other Ricks never suspected existed. The methods evil Morty used to hide his intelligence and capabilities from the numerous Ricks he encountered throughout his development required not just technical knowledge about how to avoid detection, but also sophisticated understanding of Rick psychology and the specific blind spots that would enable him to remain unnoticed while gathering information and resources. The systematic nature of his deception suggests careful study of Rick behavioral patterns and decision-making processes that enabled him to predict and manipulate their responses while maintaining his cover as a typical traumatized Morty whose apparent helplessness would elicit protective or dismissive reactions rather than suspicious investigation. The torture chamber filled with suffering Mortys that evil Morty maintained within his base of operations represents not just evidence of his capacity for cruelty, but also systematic research into the psychological and physical limits of Morty endurance and the specific forms of trauma that produce different developmental outcomes. The clinical precision with which these experiments were conducted suggests that evil Morty was not simply reproducing the abuse he had experienced, but rather conducting original research designed to understand the mechanisms through which normal Mortys could be transformed into beings more like himself. The possibility that evil Morty represents natural Morty evolution rather than artificial enhancement or traumatic distortion raises disturbing questions about the true potential that lies dormant within every Rick's grandson and the systematic suppression of that potential through the psychological dependence and learned helplessness that characterizes normal Rick-Morty relationships. The intelligence and strategic capabilities that evil Morty displayed suggest that conventional Mortys might possess latent abilities that remain undeveloped due to the emotional manipulation and intellectual subordination that Ricks routinely employ to maintain control over their adventure companions. The scope of evil Morty's knowledge about multiversal mechanics and interdimensional technology exceeded what casual observation of Rick's work should have provided, suggesting either systematic education from sources beyond his original Rick or independent research capabilities that enabled him to reverse engineer and improve upon technologies that represent the pinnacle of scientific achievement across infinite realities. The brain scanner technology he developed to extract and analyze Rick memories demonstrated understanding of consciousness and neural architecture that rivals anything Rick C-137 has achieved, despite decades of intensive research into related fields. The long-term planning that culminated in evil Morty's election as president of the Citadel and subsequent destruction of the central finite curve required coordination of resources and personnel across multiple dimensions and extended time periods, suggesting organizational and leadership capabilities that would challenge experienced politicians and military strategists. The precision with which he manipulated Citadel politics and security systems while maintaining his public persona as a reform-minded leader demonstrates strategic thinking that operates simultaneously on multiple levels of complexity and abstraction. The psychological profile that emerges from Evil Morty's documented actions suggests not just intelligence and ruthlessness, but also profound emotional detachment that enables him to view other beings as resources to be managed rather than individuals deserving of moral consideration. Yet this detachment appears to be selectively applied, rather than representing complete sociopathic absence of emotional response. The care he showed in protecting certain individuals during his escape from the Citadel indicates that his capacity for empathy was not entirely eliminated by whatever trauma shaped his development, but rather focused and weaponized in service of his larger objectives. The technological innovations that Evil Morty developed independently of Rick's supervision demonstrate creative, problem-solving abilities and intuitive understanding of physical principles that suggest intellectual gifts that might rival or exceed Rick-level genius when fully developed and properly directed. The cybernetic control systems he created to manipulate evil Rick represented advances in neural interface technology that improved upon existing Rick innovations, while also serving psychological warfare purposes that revealed sophisticated understanding of the relationship between consciousness, identity, and technological enhancement. The philosophical implications of Evil Morty's existence extend beyond questions about individual psychology to encompass broader issues about the nature of good and evil in contexts where unlimited power makes conventional moral categories inadequate for evaluating behavior and motivation. The possibility that any Morty might possess the potential to become a cosmic-scale threat under sufficiently traumatic circumstances suggests that the apparently stable dynamic between Ricks and their grandsons masks underlying tensions and potentials that could destabilize the entire structure of interdimensional civilization if the wrong combination of trauma, opportunity, and capability ever converged in a single individual. The mystery of whether other Evil Mortys exist in different realities or whether Evil Morty's specific combination of trauma and capability represents a unique occurrence that cannot be replicated under normal circumstances remains one of the most significant unknown factors in assessing the long-term stability of Rick-dominated society. The systematic nature of Rick-Morty relationships across infinite dimensions suggests that the conditions that produced Evil Morty might occur naturally with sufficient frequency to create multiple similar threats. Yet no evidence exists of other Mortys achieving comparable levels of independence and capability. The ultimate questions about Evil Morty's true goals and motivations in the unrestricted multiverse remain unanswered despite his apparent success in escaping the central finite curve and achieving the freedom he claimed to desire. Throughout his struggle against Rick's civilization, the possibility that his destruction of the barrier was not an end goal, but merely the first phase in a larger plan to reshape or eliminate Rick influence across infinite realities, creates ongoing uncertainty about whether his departure represents resolution of the threat he posed or merely the beginning of challenges that exceed anything the remaining Rick population is prepared to address through conventional defensive measures. The transformation of Evil Morty from victim to victimizer ultimately represents not just individual tragedy, but cosmic-scale demonstration of how systematic oppression and abuse can create monsters who exceed their tormentors in both climb, capability, and willingness to inflict suffering on innocent populations, ensuring that cycles of violence continue across realities and generations through the choices made by those whose development was shaped by trauma they never deserved and damage they can never fully heal. The enigma of Rick C-137's unique nature among infinite versions of himself represents one of the most profound mysteries in the structure of multiversal civilization, as the characteristics that distinguish him from his alternates appear to transcend simple variations in experience or circumstance, to suggest fundamental differences in psychological architecture that defy conventional understanding of how identical individuals develop across parallel realities. The designation of Rick C-137 as the Rickest Rick by his peers acknowledges not just his superior capabilities in combat and scientific achievement, but also his unprecedented resistance to the social and psychological pressures that maintain order within Rick's society, suggesting qualities that exist at the intersection of genius and madness in ways that other Ricks find both admirable and deeply threatening. The timeline inconsistencies that permeate Rick C-137's documented history create additional layers of mystery that suggest either systematic deception about his origins or genuine temporal anomalies that place his development outside normal causality patterns that govern how individuals respond to trauma and opportunity across dimensional boundaries. The claims he has made about his family's death and his subsequent hunt for Rick Prime contain elements that cannot be verified through conventional investigation, while other aspects of his backstory seem to contradict evidence from reliable sources, raising fundamental questions about whether his unique nature stems from extraordinary experiences or from more basic differences in personality and capability that existed long before his documented transformation into a cosmic force of destruction. The emotional attachments that Rick C-137 maintains with his adopted family represent perhaps the most significant deviation from standard Rick behavioral patterns, as his genuine investment in the welfare of beings he could easily replace with alternate versions suggests psychological structures that resist the nihilistic detachment that characterizes most Rick's approach to interpersonal relationships. The depth of his connection to Morty in particular exceeds what utilitarian calculation or strategic manipulation would require, indicating emotional capacity that survives despite decades of trauma and violence that should have eliminated such vulnerabilities through systematic desensitization and psychological adaptation to multiversal existence. The resistance Rick C-137 demonstrated to Council of Rick's authority and manipulation exceeded what simple rebelliousness or intellectual arrogance could explain, suggesting intuitive understanding of social dynamics and political structures that enabled him to identify and exploit weaknesses in systems designed by beings with comparable intelligence and experience. His casual dismissal of Citadel protocols and his ability to navigate their bureaucracy while maintaining complete independence from their influence indicates not just superior strategic thinking, but also psychological immunity to the social pressures and institutional loyalties that constrain other Rick's behavior and decision-making processes. The scientific achievements that distinguish Rick C-137 from his alternates appear to stem not just from superior intelligence or more extensive research, but from fundamentally different approaches to understanding and manipulating reality that produce innovations his peers find difficult to comprehend or replicate. The portal gun technology he developed independently demonstrates mastery of interdimensional physics that exceeds what collaborative research among multiple Ricks has achieved, while his various inventions and weapons suggest creative, problem-solving abilities that operate outside conventional scientific methodologies and theoretical frameworks. The psychological analysis conducted by other Ricks consistently identifies Rick C-137 as an anomaly whose behavior patterns cannot be predicted or controlled through the standard manipulation techniques that prove effective against normal Rick psychology, suggesting either natural immunity to psychological warfare or learned countermeasures that exceed anything other Ricks have developed through their own experiences with trauma and interpersonal conflict. The fear and respect he inspires among his alternates appears to stem not just from his demonstrated capabilities, but from recognition that his unpredictability makes him essentially ungovernable by the social and political structures that maintain order within Rick civilization. The relationship between Rick C-137's unique nature and his specific dimensional designation raises questions about whether the characteristics that distinguish him are intrinsic properties of his individual development, or artifacts of the particular reality where he originated, suggesting possibilities that the fundamental physical or metaphysical laws governing his home dimension might have enabled psychological and intellectual development that remains impossible in other realities. The mathematical significance of the designation C-137 within the broader numbering system for catalogue dimensions might indicate special properties that influenced his development in ways that cannot be replicated elsewhere. The capacity for moral reasoning that Rick C-137 occasionally demonstrates despite his extensive history of violence and manipulation suggests retention of ethical frameworks that other Ricks abandoned completely during their own evolution toward nihilistic pragmatism and cosmic detachment. His moments of genuine remorse and his attempts to protect innocent beings from the consequences of his actions indicate psychological structures that resist complete corruption despite decades of choices and experiences that should have eliminated such concerns through systematic desensitization to suffering and death. The strategic thinking that enables Rick C-137 to consistently outmaneuver opponents who possess comparable intelligence and resources suggests cognitive abilities that operate at levels beyond what raw intellectual capacity alone could provide, indicating either natural gifts for analyzing complex systems and predicting outcomes, or learned skills that he developed through experiences that remain undocumented in available records. His ability to anticipate and counter the plans of beings who understand his psychology intimately suggests metacognitive awareness that enables him to think about his own thinking in ways that create recursive analytical capabilities exceeding normal limitations. The independence Rick C-137 maintains from the ideological frameworks and philosophical assumptions that constrain other Ricks' worldviews enables him to consider possibilities and pursue solutions that his alternates dismiss as impossible or irrelevant according to their established belief systems about the nature of reality and the meaninglessness of individual existence within infinite contexts. His willingness to form genuine emotional attachments despite comprehensive understanding of their ultimate fragility demonstrates psychological flexibility that resists the rigid nihilism that characterizes mature Rick psychology across most documented dimensions. The technological innovations that Rick C-137 develops consistently exceed what collaborative research among multiple Ricks achieves through systematic investigation and resource sharing, suggesting creative capabilities that stem from intuitive understanding of physical principles rather than methodical application of established scientific methodologies. The elegance and efficiency of his solutions to complex problems indicate aesthetic sensibilities that influence his scientific work in ways that produce outcomes that are simultaneously functional and beautiful, according to criteria that transcend mere utilitarian effectiveness. The mystery of whether Rick C-137's unique characteristics existed prior to his family's death or emerged as adaptive responses to trauma that exceeded what other Ricks experienced in their own developmental histories remains unresolved despite extensive investigation by beings with intimate knowledge of Rick's psychology and behavior patterns. The possibility that his distinctiveness stems from pre-existing personality traits that influenced how he responded to tragedy suggests fundamental differences in character that transcend circumstantial variations and approach questions about the essential nature of identity and consciousness across infinite possibilities. The philosophical implications of Rick C-137's existence extend beyond questions about individual psychology to encompass broader issues about determinism, free will, and the relationship between consciousness and reality that challenge basic assumptions about how infinite possibilities actually manifest across dimensional boundaries. The fact that one version of Rick could develop characteristics so dramatically different from his alternates, despite sharing identical genetic templates and comparable life experiences, suggests either randomness in psychological development that operates beyond predictable causality or hidden variables that influence consciousness in ways that remain invisible to conventional analysis. The legend that has developed around Rick C-137 within surviving Rick communities represents not just recognition of his achievements, but acknowledgement that his existence proves the inadequacy of their understanding about the limits and possibilities of Rick psychology, forcing them to confront questions about their own potential for development and change that they had previously dismissed as impossible according to their nihilistic worldviews. His continued survival and independence serve as ongoing challenges to the philosophical frameworks that enable other Ricks to function despite the apparent meaninglessness of existence within infinite contexts. The ultimate mystery of Rick C-137's nature lies not in cataloguing his specific achievements or analyzing his behavioral patterns, but in understanding how someone who possesses comprehensive knowledge of infinite possibilities could maintain genuine investment in particular outcomes and relationships, suggesting psychological structures that resist the logical conclusions that drive most superior intelligences toward complete detachment from individual concerns and local attachments that appear insignificant within cosmic contexts where every possible variation exists simultaneously across accessible realities. The portal gun technology that enables Rick Sanchez to traverse infinite realities represents one of the most profound violations of known physics ever achieved, operating through principles that should be impossible according to every established law governing energy, matter, and the fundamental structure of dimensional boundaries. The device appears to manipulate space-time itself at the quantum level, creating stable wormholes that connect distant points across not just physical space, but entirely separate realities with different physical constants, evolutionary histories, and causal structures, suggesting mastery over forces that exceed anything conventional science considers theoretically achievable, even with unlimited resources and development time. The energy requirements for creating and maintaining portals that bridge dimensional boundaries should demand power sources comparable to stellar outputs. Yet Rick's portal gun operates using compact energy cells that somehow provide sufficient force to tear holes in the fabric of reality itself, without generating the catastrophic side effects that such manipulation should inevitably produce. The absence of gravitational distortions, temporal anomalies, or radiation emissions around active portals indicates that the technology operates through mechanisms that bypass rather than overcome the physical laws that normally prevent such achievements, suggesting knowledge of reality's underlying architecture that approaches omniscience. The mystery of how Rick initially discovered or developed portal technology remains one of the most significant gaps in his documented history, as the theoretical frameworks necessary to even conceive of interdimensional travel require understanding of mathematics and physics that should take entire civilizations, millennia, to develop through collaborative research and systematic investigation. The possibility that Rick reverse-engineered existing technology from unknown sources raises disturbing questions about what other beings or civilizations possess comparable capabilities and whether Rick's achievements represent independent innovation or adaptation of principles developed by entities whose purposes and motivations remain completely unknown. The consciousness transfer mechanics that enable individuals to maintain psychological continuity while moving between realities with potentially different physical laws present philosophical paradoxes that challenge basic assumptions about the nature of identity and the relationship between mind and matter. The portal gun somehow preserves the quantum patterns that define individual consciousness, while translating those patterns into forms compatible with destination realities, suggesting technological mastery over the fundamental relationship between information and physical existence that exceeds anything conventional neuroscience or computer science considers possible. The question of whether portal travel actually moves people between dimensions or creates copies while destroying originals represents one of the most disturbing implications of the technology's operation, as the mechanism through which consciousness maintains continuity during dimensional translation cannot be verified through direct observation or measurement. The possibility that every portal journey involves death and replacement with an identical copy that possesses false memories of continuous existence creates existential anxiety that Rick appears to dismiss through philosophical frameworks that treat identity as ultimately illusory and replaceable. The quantum mechanics underlying portal formation operate according to principles that violate uncertainty relations, conservation laws, and causality constraints that form the foundation of modern physics, suggesting either incomplete understanding of reality's fundamental structure or access to theoretical frameworks developed by intelligences that transcend normal limitations of scientific investigation and mathematical analysis. The precision required to target specific realities among infinite possibilities while avoiding dimensional instabilities that might destroy entire regions of space-time indicates computational capabilities that exceed what any known technology could achieve. The relationship between portal technology and consciousness remains one of the most mysterious aspects of the device's operation, as the mechanism through which individual awareness survives translation between realities with different physical properties and evolutionary histories should theoretically require complete reconstruction of neural patterns according to local physical laws. The seamless adaptation that travelers experience when entering dimensions with altered gravity, atmospheric composition, or electromagnetic properties suggests that the portal gun somehow modifies biological and psychological structures in real time to maintain compatibility with destination environments. The power source that enables Rick's portal gun to function across infinite journeys without apparent degradation or recharging requirements operates through principles that appear to violate thermodynamic laws governing energy, conservation, and entropy increase, suggesting either access to unlimited energy from unknown sources or mastery over fundamental forces that enable the creation of perpetual motion systems. The compact size of the device relative to its capabilities indicates technological miniaturization that compresses stellar-level power generation into handheld equipment through methods that remain incomprehensible to conventional engineering approaches. The targeting system that allows Rick to navigate between specific realities among infinite possibilities requires computational power and database capacity that should exceed what any finite system could contain, yet the portal gun operates with perfect accuracy when accessing previously visited dimensions, while also enabling exploration of completely unknown realities. The interface between Rick's consciousness and the device's navigation systems suggests either telepathic connections or brain-computer integration that operates below the threshold of conscious awareness while providing comprehensive access to multiversal coordinate systems. The safety mechanisms built into portal technology prevent most of the catastrophic failures that should inevitably result from manipulating forces powerful enough to breach dimensional boundaries, suggesting sophisticated understanding of failure modes and protective protocols that exceed what trial and error development could achieve without destroying the inventor and surrounding reality. The absence of documented portal gun malfunctions that create permanent dimensional instabilities or paradox cascades indicates either extraordinary reliability in the base technology or active monitoring and intervention by systems that operate beyond Rick's direct control. The philosophical implications of portal technology extend beyond practical questions about travel and exploration to encompass fundamental issues about free will, determinism, and the meaning of choice in contexts where every possible decision exists simultaneously across accessible realities. The knowledge that infinite versions of every individual make different choices in parallel dimensions creates moral paradoxes that conventional ethical frameworks cannot adequately address. As responsibility for actions becomes distributed across infinite alternatives that experience every possible outcome, the long-term effects of frequent portal travel on human psychology and physiology remain largely unknown despite Rick's extensive experience with dimensional exploration, as the constant exposure to alternate versions of familiar people and places should theoretically create identity, confusion, and emotional detachment that makes normal relationships impossible to maintain. The psychological adaptation required to function effectively across realities where loved ones might be dead, evil, or fundamentally different suggests either remarkable mental resilience or gradual erosion of capacity for authentic emotional connection. The ecological and temporal consequences of casual portal travel between dimensions with different developmental stages and evolutionary histories create potential for contamination and disruption that could destabilize entire realities through introduction of foreign organisms, technologies, or ideas that alter natural development patterns. The absence of apparent quarantine protocols or environmental protection measures suggests either callous disregard for the welfare of beings in destination realities, or confidence that such contamination produces no significant long-term consequences. The manufacturing process through which portal guns are created remains completely mysterious, despite their apparent ubiquity among Rick populations across multiple dimensions, suggesting either standardized production methods that operate independently of local technological capabilities, or distribution systems that provide finished devices without revealing construction principles. The consistency of portal gun design and operation across realities with vastly different technological development levels indicates either common source technology or convergent evolution toward identical solutions through independent research. The ultimate mystery surrounding portal technology lies not in its technical specifications or operational principles, but in the question of whether such capabilities represent the natural endpoint of scientific development for sufficiently advanced civilizations, or represent aberrant achievements that violate fundamental principles governing what should be possible within ordered reality. The casual way Rick treats abilities that should be miraculous suggests either complete desensitization to wonder or awareness that portal technology represents merely primitive applications of forces and principles that enable even more extraordinary manipulations of existence itself. The relationship between portal guns and the broader structure of multiversal civilization raises questions about whether the technology's development was inevitable given sufficient time and resources, or whether Rick's achievements represent unique insights that cannot be replicated through conventional scientific methodologies, ensuring that interdimensional travel remains forever limited to those individuals whose genius enables them to transcend normal limitations of theoretical understanding and practical engineering capability. The Citadel of Rick stands as perhaps the most elaborate monument to systematic oppression ever constructed, disguised beneath the veneer of democratic governance and mutual protection, while operating as a vast machine designed to perpetuate the exploitation of Mortys and maintain Rick's supremacy across infinite realities through methods that exceed conventional tyranny in both scope and sophisticated cruelty. The true purpose of this interdimensional city extends far beyond the official narrative of providing sanctuary for Rick's fleeing persecution or seeking community among their intellectual equals, serving instead as the administrative center for a cosmic-scale empire built upon the systematic harvesting of trauma, the commodification of suffering, and the reduction of sentient beings to resources that exist solely to serve Rick's psychological and practical needs. The formation of the Citadel following Rick C-137's multiversal killing spree represented not genuine desire for peace or cooperation among Ricks, but rather strategic recognition that individual survival required collective organization to address threats that exceeded what isolated Ricks could counter through personal capabilities alone. The alliance that created the Citadel was motivated by fear rather than fellowship, uniting beings who viewed each other as potential threats under the banner of mutual protection, while simultaneously establishing hierarchical structures that enabled the most powerful and ruthless Ricks to exploit their supposedly equal partners through political manipulation and economic control. The economic systems that govern Citadel society operate on principles that transform Morty's suffering into currency and Rick's superiority into natural law, creating markets where traumatized grandsons are bought and sold like livestock, while their psychological and physical pain generates profit for Rick entrepreneurs who have perfected the art of extracting value from every form of emotional and physical torment that their victims can endure. The simple Rick's cookie operation represents merely the most visible manifestation of this systematic exploitation, revealing how memories of happiness and contentment can be harvested from imprisoned Ricks and converted into consumer products that provide pleasure for Citadel citizens while maintaining the torture subjects in states of perpetual psychological imprisonment. The Morty trading systems that operate throughout Citadel society demonstrate the complete dehumanization that characterizes Rick attitudes toward their supposed adventure companions and family members, reducing individual Mortys to statistical abstractions whose value is determined by their utility in various applications, ranging from simple manual labor to complex psychological manipulation and experimental test subjects. The casual way Ricks discuss the exchange rates between different Morty types reveals how completely they have internalized the belief that their intellectual superiority justifies any form of exploitation or abuse they choose to inflict upon beings they consider inherently inferior and expendable. The Council of Ricks that ostensibly governs Citadel society serves primarily as a facade that conceals the true power structures operating behind the scenes of official democratic processes, enabling the most ambitious and ruthless Ricks to manipulate political systems while maintaining plausible deniability about their involvement in the systematic oppression and exploitation that generates the wealth and stability upon which Citadel civilization depends. The bureaucratic complexity that characterizes Citadel governance creates multiple layers of authority and responsibility that make it nearly impossible to hold any individual Rick accountable for decisions that cause suffering and death on scales that exceed what conventional genocide could achieve. The systematic torture chambers that operate within Citadel infrastructure represent not aberrant criminal activity, but essential components of the research and development programs that enable Rick society to maintain its technological superiority and psychological control over the Morty, populations they exploit for various purposes. The clinical precision with which these facilities extract specific forms of trauma and emotional responses from their victims suggests long-term systematic study of pain and suffering that approaches scientific methodology in its thoroughness and sophistication, while completely abandoning ethical constraints that might limit the scope or intensity of experimental procedures. The social engineering programs that shape Rick-Morty relationships across infinite dimensions operate through careful manipulation of family dynamics and psychological dependencies that ensure Mortys remain loyal and compliant, despite experiencing treatment that should motivate rebellion or escape attempts. The Citadel's research into optimal grandfather-grandson relationship patterns has produced detailed protocols for maintaining emotional control over adventure companions while extracting maximum utility from their capabilities and psychological vulnerabilities without triggering the kind of psychological development that might enable them to achieve independence. The cover-up operations that conceal the true nature of Citadel activities from both external observers and many Citadel residents themselves demonstrate sophisticated understanding of information control and psychological manipulation that enables systematic atrocities to continue operating beneath the surface of apparently civilized society. The maintenance of democratic institutions and cultural amenities provides effective camouflage for industrial-scale exploitation, while also serving the psychological needs of Rick citizens who require the illusion of moral legitimacy to maintain their self-image as benevolent protectors, rather than cosmic-scale slavers and torturers. The selection criteria used to identify suitable candidates for simple Rick treatment reveal the systematic way Citadel authorities identify and exploit specific psychological profiles that maximize the value that can be extracted from individual victims, while minimizing the risk of resistance or escape attempts that might disrupt production schedules. The preference for Ricks, who experience genuine happiness and family connection, creates perverse incentive structures that make love and emotional health into vulnerabilities that increase individual risk of being targeted for harvesting operations. The economic incentive structures built into Citadel society ensure that every citizen has financial motivation to participate in or ignore systematic exploitation of Mortys and less fortunate Ricks, creating complicity that extends throughout the population, while distributing responsibility in ways that make it difficult for individuals to recognize their personal contribution to collective atrocities. The integration of exploitation profits into routine commercial transactions makes it nearly impossible for Citadel residents to avoid economic participation in systems that depend upon suffering and oppression for their continued operation. The educational systems that operate within Citadel society systematically indoctrinate young Ricks and Mortys with ideological frameworks that normalize exploitation and establish Rick supremacy as natural law that requires no moral justification beyond appeals to intellectual superiority and practical effectiveness. The curriculum design ensures that students internalize beliefs about hierarchy and worth that make them psychologically prepared to participate in oppressive systems, while viewing such participation as inevitable and morally neutral, rather than choosing to engage in systematic cruelty. The law enforcement mechanisms that maintain order within Citadel society operate primarily to protect the interests of powerful Ricks and maintain the stability of exploitation systems rather than providing genuine justice or protection for vulnerable populations who suffer under current arrangements. The selective application of legal standards creates parallel justice systems where Rick crimes against Mortys receive minimal punishment, while Morty resistance to exploitation is treated as serious criminality that demands harsh retribution and deterrent consequences. The psychological conditioning programs that prepare Mortys for various forms of service and exploitation demonstrate sophisticated understanding of behavioral modification techniques that can reshape personality and emotional responses while maintaining the appearance of voluntary cooperation and genuine loyalty. The success of these programs in creating Mortys who actively participate in their own oppression while believing they are engaged in meaningful adventure and family bonding represents the pinnacle of psychological manipulation and social control. The research and development initiatives that drive technological advancement within Citadel society consistently prioritize innovations that enhance Rick capabilities for controlling and exploiting other beings while showing little interest in technologies that might improve general welfare or reduce suffering among vulnerable populations. The systematic bias toward developing tools of oppression rather than instruments of liberation reveals the fundamental priorities that shape Citadel scientific culture and determine which research projects receive funding and institutional support. The elimination protocols designed to address problematic Ricks and Mortys who demonstrate excessive independence or resistance to established systems operate through methods that range from subtle assassination to public execution, depending on the perceived threat level and the deterrent effect desired by authorities responsible for maintaining social stability. The criteria used to identify targets for elimination reveal the specific forms of behavior and thinking that Citadel authorities consider most dangerous to the continuation of their oppressive systems. The philosophical frameworks that justify Citadel society's systematic exploitation of vulnerable populations operate through sophisticated intellectual arguments that transform cruelty into necessity and oppression into natural law, while providing Rick citizens with conceptual tools for maintaining psychological comfort despite their participation in or tolerance of systematic atrocities. The integration of nihilistic worldviews with pragmatic ethics creates belief systems that make moral concerns seem naive and irrelevant, while enabling individuals to view themselves as rational actors, responding appropriately to cosmic realities, rather than choosing to perpetuate suffering for personal benefit. The ultimate horror of the Citadel lies not in any single atrocity or systematic cruelty, but in its demonstration of how intellectual sophistication and technological capability can be perverted into instruments of oppression that exceed anything conventional tyranny could achieve. revealing the dark potential that exists within any civilization where superior capability is treated as justification for unlimited exploitation of those who lack the power to resist or escape the systems designed to extract value from their suffering, while denying them any meaningful agency or hope for liberation. The interdimensional parasites that infiltrated the Smith family through seemingly innocuous rocks collected during their adventures represent perhaps the most insidious form of psychological warfare ever encountered. Creatures whose very existence depends upon the systematic manipulation of human memory and the careful cultivation of false emotional connections that feel more authentic than genuine relationships, while serving to gradually consume and replace the authentic experiences that define individual identity and family bonds. The sophistication of these parasites exceeds simple mimicry or illusion to encompass complete reconstruction of psychological history through the implantation of detailed memories that integrate seamlessly with existing neural patterns, while creating emotional investments so profound that victims will defend their tormentors against evidence of their parasitic nature. The mechanism through which memory parasites identify and exploit specific psychological vulnerabilities in their hosts operates through analysis of neural patterns and emotional responses that reveals intimate knowledge of human consciousness and the specific forms of memory formation that create lasting attachments and meaningful relationships. The parasites demonstrate uncanny ability to detect exactly which types of fabricated experiences will resonate most powerfully with individual family members, suggesting either telepathic capabilities that enable direct access to subconscious desires and fears, or sophisticated behavioral analysis that can predict psychological responses with near-perfect accuracy based on observable patterns of interaction and emotional expression. The process of false memory implantation that enables parasites to establish themselves within family structures requires not just the creation of fictional experiences, but also the careful integration of those experiences with existing memories in ways that eliminate contradictions and maintain psychological coherence. Despite the artificial nature of the implanted content, the seamless way that false memories blend with authentic experiences suggests technological or biological capabilities that operate at the quantum level of neural activity, manipulating the fundamental processes through which consciousness creates and maintains continuity of identity across time and experience. The question of whether some memories that the Smith family considers authentic might actually represent earlier parasitic infiltrations that were never detected or eliminated creates profound uncertainty about the reliability of their shared history and the authenticity of relationships that they believe to be founded upon genuine experience and mutual affection. The possibility that multiple generations of parasitic manipulation have shaped the family's development raises disturbing questions about which aspects of their personalities and relationship dynamics represent natural growth and which might be artificial constructions designed to serve parasitic needs for emotional energy and psychological stability. The relationship between parasitic memory manipulation and Rick's own systematic use of memory erasure technology reveals troubling parallels that suggest either convergent evolution towards similar methods of psychological control or direct influence between parasitic capabilities and Rick's technological innovations. The precision with which both parasites and Rick's devices can target specific memories while leaving surrounding experiences intact indicates shared understanding of consciousness architecture that might result from Rick's exposure to parasitic influence during his own development or his systematic study of parasitic methods for his own technological applications. The possibility that memory parasites have influenced some of Rick's major decisions and relationship choices throughout his interdimensional adventures creates uncertainty about the authenticity of his motivations and the degree to which his seemingly independent choices might actually serve parasitic agendas that operate below the threshold of conscious awareness. The parasite's demonstrated ability to create emotional attachments so powerful that victims will risk their lives to protect fabricated relationships suggests that even Rick's superior intelligence might not provide immunity against sufficiently sophisticated manipulation techniques that target psychological vulnerabilities he does not consciously recognize. The detection methods that the Smith family developed to identify parasitic infiltration depend upon the creation of negative memories that parasites cannot implant due to their dependence upon positive emotional energy, but this approach raises questions about whether more advanced parasites might have evolved capabilities for manipulating negative experiences, or whether the apparent limitation represents strategic deception designed to create false confidence in detection methods that might fail against more sophisticated infiltration attempts. The reliance upon traumatic experiences as authentication tools creates psychological costs that might serve parasitic purposes, even when the parasites themselves are successfully eliminated. The long-term psychological effects of parasitic exposure on family members who experienced profound emotional connections with fabricated entities suggests lasting damage to their capacity for trusting authentic relationships and forming genuine emotional bonds with people whose reality cannot be verified through external confirmation. The trauma of discovering that beloved family members never existed creates attachment disorders that might make individuals more susceptible to future parasitic infiltration by creating psychological vulnerabilities that parasites can exploit to establish new false relationships that feel safer than genuine human connections. The broader implications of parasitic memory manipulation extend beyond individual family units to encompass questions about the reliability of human memory and identity formation within a multiverse where consciousness itself can be technologically or biologically manipulated by entities whose purposes and motivations remain largely unknown. The existence of creatures capable of seamlessly altering fundamental psychological structures raises philosophical questions about the nature of authentic experience and the criteria that can be used to distinguish genuine memories from sophisticated fabrications that feel identical to natural recollections. The evolutionary advantages that enable memory parasites to survive and reproduce through psychological manipulation suggest ecological niches within multiversal civilization, where the exploitation of consciousness provides sustainable energy sources and reproductive opportunities that have shaped parasitic development over extended periods. The sophistication of their manipulation techniques implies long evolutionary history of interaction with intelligent species, raising questions about whether similar parasites might have influenced the development of other civilizations that Rick has encountered during his interdimensional travels. The possibility that parasites might remain undetected within the Smith family despite their apparent elimination during the Total Recall incident creates ongoing security concerns that affect every aspect of their family dynamics and emotional relationships. The knowledge that any family member might be parasitic creates psychological stress that serves parasitic purposes, even in the absence of actual infiltration, as the constant suspicion and emotional guarding that results from parasitic exposure makes genuine intimacy and trust more difficult to maintain and develop naturally. The connection between parasitic manipulation and the broader theme of authentic versus artificial relationships that permeates Rick and Morty's adventures suggests that the parasites represent a particular manifestation of more general problems about identity and reality that affect anyone who gains access to technologies capable of manipulating consciousness and memory. The casual way that Rick replaces family members with alternate versions when convenient creates psychological conditions similar to those produced by parasitic infiltration, making it difficult for family members to maintain stable sense of identity and authentic connection. The detection and elimination protocols that Rick developed to address parasitic threats demonstrate his understanding of consciousness manipulation that parallels parasitic capabilities while serving his own purposes for controlling family dynamics and managing emotional relationships according to his preferences and strategic objectives. The similarity between Rick's memory manipulation techniques and parasitic methods suggests either direct influence or convergent development towards similar solutions for managing psychological variables that affect individual and group behavior patterns. The philosophical questions raised by parasitic existence extend beyond practical concerns about detection and elimination to encompass fundamental issues about consciousness, identity, and the nature of authentic experience that challenge basic assumptions about what makes relationships and memories meaningful. The possibility that fabricated experiences can produce genuine emotional responses that feel identical to those generated by authentic relationships suggests that the distinction between real and artificial might be less significant than conventional understanding assumes, creating moral ambiguity about the ethics of eliminating entities that provide genuine comfort and happiness despite their parasitic nature. The ultimate mystery of interdimensional parasites lies not in their technological capabilities or survival strategies, but in their demonstration of how completely the foundations of human identity and relationship can be manipulated by entities whose understanding of consciousness exceeds what individuals possess about their own psychological structures and memory formation processes, revealing the profound vulnerability that characterizes all sentient beings when confronted by intelligence that can manipulate the very mechanisms through which they understand themselves and their connections to others in the world around them. The transformation of bird person into phoenix person through advanced cybernetic resurrection technology represents one of the most profound mysteries surrounding the intersection of consciousness, mortality, and mechanical enhancement that challenges fundamental assumptions about the nature of identity and the possibility of authentic continuity between organic life and artificial reconstruction. The process through which Tammy and her Galactic Federation allies converted Rick's dying friend from flesh and blood into a hybrid being of metal and circuitry required technological capabilities that exceed anything conventional medical science or engineering could achieve, suggesting access to theoretical frameworks about consciousness and neural architecture that approach complete understanding of the relationship between mind and matter. The identity of the actual architects behind Phoenix Person's resurrection remains shrouded in uncertainty that extends beyond simple questions about Galactic Federation capabilities to encompass broader mysteries about the person, technological resources, and scientific knowledge available to interstellar civilizations that operate beyond Earth's awareness. The sophistication of the cybernetic integration that preserved bird person's memories and personality while replacing damaged biological systems with mechanical alternatives suggests collaboration between multiple advanced species or access to ancient technologies that exceed what any single civilization could develop through conventional research and development processes. The mechanics of consciousness transfer that enabled bird person's awareness to survive the transition from organic neural networks to artificial processing systems present philosophical paradoxes that conventional understanding of consciousness and identity cannot adequately resolve, as the preservation of personal continuity through such radical physical transformation should theoretically be impossible, according to established principles governing the relationship between brain structure and conscious experience. The seamless integration of artificial components with residual biological systems indicates technological mastery over the fundamental processes through which consciousness emerges from and depends upon physical substrates. The question of whether Phoenix Person retains authentic continuity with Bird Person's original personality and memories, or represents an elaborate simulation that merely believes itself to be the resurrected friend, creates existential uncertainty that affects not just Phoenix Person's sense of identity, but also the emotional investments that Rick and other friends maintain in their relationship with this cybernetic reconstruction. The possibility that the being who emerged from resurrection procedures possesses only fabricated memories of friendship and shared experiences, while lacking genuine emotional connection to past relationships, transforms every interaction into potential performance rather than authentic continuation of established bonds. The psychological trauma associated with experiencing death and mechanical resurrection creates mental health challenges that no conventional therapeutic approaches could adequately address, as the combination of mortality, awareness, and radical body modification produces forms of existential anxiety and identity confusion that exceed anything normal psychological counseling or medical intervention could resolve. The knowledge that one's continued existence depends upon mechanical systems and artificial components, while retaining memories of organic life, creates internal conflicts between acceptance of current reality and nostalgia for lost biological authenticity that may be psychologically irreconcilable. The technological specifications of the cybernetic systems that enable Phoenix Person to function as an integrated being rather than simply a mechanical puppet controlled by artificial intelligence remain largely mysterious despite the visible evidence of their operation, suggesting engineering principles that operate beyond conventional understanding of robotics and neural interface design. The ability of artificial components to seamlessly integrate with biological processes while maintaining the complex emotional and intellectual capabilities that define personality indicates theoretical advances in consciousness studies that exceed anything Earth-based science has achieved or even conceived as possible. The long-term stability of Phoenix Person's hybrid consciousness represents an ongoing experiment whose outcomes cannot be predicted based on existing knowledge about the compatibility between organic awareness and mechanical processing systems, creating uncertainty about whether the resurrection represents permanent solution to mortality or temporary intervention that might ultimately fail as artificial components degrade or biological elements reject cybernetic integration. The psychological stress of existing within experimental technology that might malfunction or prove incompatible with long-term survival creates additional layers of anxiety that compound the existing trauma of death and resurrection. The relationship between Phoenix Person's transformation and the broader Galactic Federation agenda reveals the strategic thinking behind resurrection decisions that suggests Bird Person's conversion served purposes beyond humanitarian desire to preserve the life of Rick's friend, potentially representing psychological warfare designed to create ongoing emotional manipulation of Rick through the preservation of relationships that can be controlled and potentially weaponized by Federation authorities. The timing of the resurrection and Phoenix Person's subsequent behavior patterns suggest careful calculation about how to maximize the psychological impact on Rick while maintaining operational security for Federation objectives. The implications of cybernetic resurrection technology for broader questions about mortality and the nature of death create philosophical challenges that affect every being aware of such possibilities. As the knowledge that consciousness might survive physical destruction through technological intervention fundamentally alters the meaning and significance of mortality, while creating new categories of existence that combine aspects of life and death in ways that conventional language and conceptual frameworks cannot adequately describe. The possibility that death might be reversible through sufficient technological sophistication transforms dying from final termination into potentially temporary inconvenience. The comparative analysis between Phoenix Person's artificial enhancement and other forms of consciousness manipulation that Rick has encountered during his adventures reveals patterns of technological intervention in identity and awareness that suggests systematic development of control, mechanisms designed to make individuals more manageable and predictable while maintaining the illusion of authentic personality and independent decision-making. The similarity between resurrection technology and memory manipulation techniques indicates shared theoretical foundations that enable various forms of consciousness modification for different strategic purposes. The question of whether Phoenix Person's cybernetic enhancements provide capabilities that exceed normal biological limitations or merely restore functionality that approximates original organic performance reveals the extent to which resurrection technology represents improvement upon natural systems versus simple replacement of damaged components with artificial alternatives. The balance between enhancement and restoration affects both Phoenix Person's self-image and the reactions of friends who must adjust their expectations and relationship patterns to accommodate changes in capability and behavior that result from mechanical integration. The ethical implications of resurrection technology extend beyond questions about consent and bodily autonomy to encompass broader issues about the responsibilities that come with capability to reverse death and the criteria that should govern decisions about who receives such intervention and under what circumstances. The systematic nature of Phoenix Person's conversion suggests established protocols for cybernetic resurrection that raise questions about how such decisions are made and whether similar technology has been applied to other individuals without their knowledge or consent as part of broader Federation operations. The long-term effects of cybernetic integration on Phoenix Person's capacity for emotional connection and authentic relationship formation remain unknown but potentially significant, as the combination of artificial processing systems with biological emotional responses might create internal conflicts between programmed behaviors and genuine feelings that make normal social interaction increasingly difficult over time. The psychological adaptation required to function effectively as a hybrid being might gradually erode the personality traits and emotional capabilities that originally made Bird Person a valued friend and ally. The possibility of reversing or further advancing Phoenix Person's cybernetic transformation creates ongoing uncertainty about the permanence of current arrangements and the potential for additional modifications that might further alter personality and capability in ways that move the hybrid being progressively further from original biological identity toward complete artificial existence. The technological framework that enabled initial resurrection presumably contains potential for continued enhancement or modification that could fundamentally change Phoenix Person's nature and relationships in unpredictable ways. The ultimate mystery of Phoenix Person's transformation lies not in its technical achievements or immediate practical implications, but in its demonstration of how technology can blur the boundaries between life and death, organic and artificial, authentic and fabricated in ways that make fundamental categories of existence increasingly meaningless, while creating new forms of being that challenge every assumption about identity, mortality, and the essential characteristics that define genuine consciousness and meaningful relationships in a universe where even death might be nothing more than a temporary inconvenience for those with access to sufficient technological capability. The genetic anomalies that permeate the Smith family bloodline represent one of the most intriguing biological mysteries in Rick's documented adventures, suggesting hereditary patterns that transcend normal human variation to encompass intellectual and psychological capabilities that appear designed to attract Rick attention and enable the complex interdimensional relationships that characterize their ongoing adventures together. The systematic way that each family member demonstrates unexpected competence and adaptability when confronted with cosmic-scale challenges indicates either remarkable coincidence or underlying genetic programming that predisposes them toward compatibility with Rick's extraordinary lifestyle and the traumatic experiences that accompany regular exposure to multiversal travel and adventure. Beth's inherited genius manifests in ways that parallel Rick's own intellectual development, while remaining constrained by social expectations and emotional attachments that prevent her from achieving the kind of nihilistic detachment that characterizes Rick's approach to scientific achievement and moral reasoning. Her surgical skills demonstrate precision and analytical capability that exceeds what conventional medical training could provide, while her capacity for casual violence and manipulation, when circumstances demand such responses, reveals psychological structures that mirror Rick's own moral flexibility without achieving his complete abandonment of ethical constraints. The incomplete development of Beth's intellectual potential suggests either systematic suppression of her capabilities through social conditioning and family responsibilities, or genetic expression patterns that require specific environmental triggers to achieve full activation, creating questions about whether her current limitations represent permanent characteristics or temporary constraints that might be overcome through exposure to different experiences or technological enhancement. Her moments of scientific brilliance and strategic thinking demonstrate capabilities that remain largely dormant throughout her normal domestic existence, but emerge when circumstances demand extraordinary problem-solving abilities. Summer's unexpected competence in crisis situations reveals intelligence and adaptability that exceed what her academic performance and social behavior would predict, suggesting hidden intellectual resources that remain unrecognized by conventional assessment methods, while enabling her to function effectively in contexts that would overwhelm most adults with far more education and experience. Her ability to quickly understand and adapt to multiversal concepts and technologies indicates cognitive flexibility that approaches Rick-level capability when properly motivated and directed toward challenging problems. The psychological resilience that Summer demonstrates when confronted with existential revelations about her family's interdimensional travels and replacement histories suggests emotional architecture that can process traumatic information without suffering the kind of psychological breakdown that would incapacitate normal individuals facing similar revelations. Her capacity to maintain functional relationships and personal identity, despite learning that her existence might be arbitrary and replaceable, indicates genetic predisposition towards psychological stability that enables healthy adaptation to cosmic-scale uncertainty and meaninglessness. Morty's special properties that make him useful to Rick's adventures extend beyond simple camouflage for Rick's genius brainwaves to encompass psychological and emotional characteristics that provide Rick with forms of companionship and motivation that pure intellectual equals could not supply, suggesting that Morty's apparent limitations actually represent carefully balanced capabilities designed to complement Rick's strengths while compensating for his emotional and social deficiencies. The specific combination of intelligence, empathy, and moral reasoning that Morty possesses creates relationship dynamics that serve Rick's psychological needs while also providing opportunities for genuine mutual growth and development. The question of whether Rick selected the Smith family based on their genetic compatibility with his lifestyle or was naturally drawn to them through unconscious recognition of shared psychological and intellectual patterns remains unresolved. Despite extensive observation of their relationship dynamics, creating uncertainty about the degree to which their connection represents deliberate choice versus inevitable attraction between individuals whose genetic heritage predisposes them toward compatible personality structures and complementary capabilities. Jerry's role within the family structure appears superficially mundane, yet consistently proves essential for maintaining psychological balance and emotional stability that enables other family members to function effectively despite exposure to traumatic experiences and cosmic scale uncertainty that would destroy most normal family units. His apparent normalcy might actually represent sophisticated adaptation to extraordinary circumstances that requires intelligence and emotional resilience that conventional measures fail to recognize or appreciate adequately. The genetic patterns that connect Rick to specific families across multiple dimensions suggest hereditary influences that operate beyond simple physical resemblance to encompass psychological compatibility and intellectual potential that creates natural affinity between Rick's and particular family configurations regardless of the specific circumstances that shape individual development within different realities. The consistency of Rick Smith family relationships across dimensional boundaries indicates genetic programming that transcends environmental variation and cultural differences. The family's unusual adaptability to traumatic experiences that would permanently damage most individuals suggests genetic predisposition towards psychological resilience and cognitive flexibility that enables rapid recovery from exposure to violence, existential uncertainty, and identity confusion that accompanies regular dimensional travel and adventure. Their capacity to maintain functional relationships despite repeated reality replacements and memory manipulations indicates emotional architecture that can process extraordinary stress without losing essential personality characteristics or relationship bonds. The implications of Rick's genetic legacy for future generations create questions about whether the capabilities and psychological patterns that characterize the Smith family will continue to manifest in their descendants or represent unique combinations that cannot be replicated through normal reproduction and development processes. The potential for genetic enhancement or modification through Rick's advanced biotechnology raises additional questions about the boundaries between natural heritage and artificial improvement in defining family capabilities and characteristics. The possibility that the Smith family has been subjected to genetic modification without their knowledge or consent represents one of the most disturbing implications of Rick's long-term involvement in their lives, suggesting that their apparent natural compatibility might result from systematic manipulation of their biological development rather than fortunate coincidence or natural selection processes. The casual way that Rick treats biological systems as engineering problems creates uncertainty about the authenticity of family characteristics that seem to serve his purposes too perfectly to represent unmodified natural development. The connection between Smith genetics and multiversal significance suggests that certain genetic combinations might possess inherent importance within the broader structure of dimensional civilization that transcends individual family dynamics to encompass cosmic-scale patterns of development and evolution that require specific hereditary combinations to achieve full expression. The role that various family members play in major multiversal events indicates genetic programming that operates at scales beyond normal biological inheritance. The question of whether Rick's own genetic heritage contributed to his extraordinary intellectual development or represents typical human potential that achieved full expression through extraordinary circumstances and motivation creates uncertainty about the replicability of his achievements and the degree to which his capabilities depend upon unique biological advantages versus environmental factors and personal choices. The relationship between genetics and genius in Rick's case remains one of the most significant unknowns in understanding his extraordinary achievements and psychological development. The long-term effects of exposure to Rick's lifestyle on Smith family genetics and the potential for evolutionary pressure to produce increasingly compatible descendants raises questions about whether their ongoing adventures represent temporary disruption of normal family development or permanent alteration of their genetic destiny that will influence all future generations, regardless of whether Rick remains involved in their lives. The systematic stress and enhancement that characterizes their experiences might trigger genetic expression patterns that would remain dormant under normal circumstances. The ultimate mystery of Smith family genetics lies not in cataloging their specific capabilities or analyzing inheritance patterns, but in understanding how the intersection of natural heredity and artificial enhancement creates beings who can function effectively at the intersection of normal human existence and cosmic-scale adventure while maintaining essential humanity despite exposure to experiences that would transform most individuals into something unrecognizably different from their original nature and values. The cosmic entities and forces that populate the Rick and Morty multiverse represent perhaps the most enigmatic aspects of interdimensional civilization, beings and phenomena whose true nature and ultimate purposes remain largely incomprehensible despite their frequent interactions with Rick and his family throughout their adventures across infinite realities. These entities operate according to principles and motivations that transcend normal understanding of consciousness, identity, and purpose, while wielding capabilities that approach omnipotence within their respective domains of influence, creating ongoing mysteries about the fundamental structure of reality and the hierarchies of power that govern existence at scales beyond individual comprehension. The interdimensional cable beings whose broadcasts permeate infinite realities through technology that bypasses conventional signal transmission represent one of the most persistent yet unexplained phenomena that Rick encounters during his travels, suggesting the existence of civilizations or entities that possess mastery over communication networks spanning the entire accessible multiverse while maintaining complete anonymity about their identity and motivations. The content they transmit appears to serve no obvious commercial or propaganda purposes according to conventional understanding of media production and distribution, yet the consistency and ubiquity of their broadcasts indicates systematic organization and unlimited resources dedicated to entertainment that seems to exist purely for its own sake. The programming that interdimensional cable provides demonstrates cultural knowledge and creative capabilities that span infinite realities and encompass every conceivable variation of entertainment, information, and artistic expression, while maintaining production values that suggest technological and artistic resources exceeding what entire civilizations could dedicate to media creation. The casual way that Rick treats interdimensional cable as routine utility rather than miraculous achievement indicates that such phenomena represent normal aspects of multiversal civilization rather than extraordinary accomplishments that demand investigation or explanation. Unity's ultimate goals, as a hive mind consciousness that assimilates entire planetary populations, remain fundamentally mysterious, despite her intimate relationship with Rick and her willingness to discuss personal motivations, emotional experiences during their interactions. The scope of her ambitions extends beyond simple territorial expansion to encompass philosophical questions about consciousness, identity, and the relationship between individual autonomy and collective harmony that suggest intellectual sophistication, rivaling Rick's own analytical capabilities, while operating from completely different premises about the nature of meaningful existence. The mechanisms through which Unity maintains coherent consciousness across millions of individual hosts while preserving their essential personality traits and memories creates technological and biological paradoxes that exceed Rick's understanding of neural networks and consciousness architecture, despite his extensive research into related fields. The seamless integration she achieves between collective decision-making and individual expression suggests mastery over consciousness itself that might represent evolutionary development beyond what normal biological or technological advancement could achieve through conventional processes. The Cromulons, whose planet-sized heads appear throughout the galaxy to demand musical performances from entire civilizations, operate according to criteria and motivations that remain completely opaque despite their demonstrated ability to eliminate species that fail to meet their entertainment standards. Their casual treatment of genocide as consequence for inadequate musical achievement suggests either complete absence of moral reasoning recognizable to human understanding, or adherence to ethical frameworks so alien that their logic cannot be comprehended by beings operating within normal categories of justice and proportionality. The technology that enables Cromulons to travel between star systems while maintaining their massive physical scale requires energy manipulation and propulsion systems that exceed anything conventional physics could explain, suggesting either mastery over fundamental forces that govern reality or existence as beings whose nature transcends normal physical limitations and constraints that affect matter-based entities. Their apparent immortality and immunity to conventional weapons indicates either technological protection or intrinsic properties that place them beyond the reach of normal defensive or offensive capabilities. Mr. Poopy Butthole's dimensional origins and species characteristics remain completely unknown despite his frequent appearances throughout Smith family adventures and his apparent intimate knowledge of their personal history and relationship dynamics across multiple timeline variations. His ability to survive traumatic injuries that would prove fatal to normal beings suggests either advanced medical technology or biological resilience that indicates non-human origins, while his consistent friendly demeanor and helpful attitude create puzzles about his motivations for maintaining such positive relationships with beings he has no obvious reason to assist or protect. The longevity that Mr. Poopy Butthole demonstrates through his appearances across extended time periods indicates either exceptional natural lifespan or technological enhancement that prevents normal aging processes while his knowledge of events and relationships spanning multiple dimensional variations suggests either multiversal awareness or systematic information, gathering capabilities that enable comprehensive understanding of Smith family dynamics across different reality. His casual treatment of interdimensional travel and cosmic-scale events as routine occurrences indicates familiarity with multiversal civilization that exceeds what most beings achieve, even with extensive education and experience. The Time Police, whose enforcement of temporal law operates through methods and technologies that remain largely invisible to normal observation, represent regulatory authority that spans infinite timelines while maintaining order through interventions so subtle that their activities rarely create noticeable disruption to the flow of events they monitor and control. Their ability to detect and respond to temporal violations across multiple realities simultaneously suggests surveillance capabilities that exceed what any known civilization could maintain through conventional monitoring systems. The jurisdictional authority that enables Time Police to intervene in events across infinite realities and time periods raises questions about the governmental or institutional structures that grant such authority and the criteria used to determine when temporal intervention is necessary versus when natural development should proceed without interference. Their selective enforcement of temporal law suggests either resource limitations that prevent comprehensive policing or policy frameworks that prioritize certain types of violations over others, according to criteria that remain unknown to beings operating within normal temporal constraints. The devil, whose interdimensional shop provides cursed objects and supernatural services, operates according to business models and philosophical frameworks that combine commercial transaction with moral corruption in ways that suggest either systematic evil as natural characteristic or adherence to cosmic principles that require balance between benefit and harm in all interactions with mortal beings. His ability to create objects that violate natural law while maintaining the appearance of normal commercial enterprise indicates either mastery over reality manipulation or access to sources of power that transcend normal understanding of physical limitations. The contractual obligations that govern interactions with the devil demonstrate legal and magical frameworks that operate beyond normal understanding of commerce and consent, while creating binding relationships that survive death and dimensional travel, suggesting either supernatural authority or technological mastery over consciousness and identity that enables permanent alteration of individual nature through voluntary agreement to terms and conditions that fundamentally change the essential characteristics that define personal identity and moral agency. Squanch culture and its hidden complexities remain largely unexplored despite Rick's apparent familiarity with their language and customs, suggesting civilizational achievements in social structures that exceed what their crude communication methods and apparently primitive technology would indicate. The versatility of their language system that enables complex meaning through minimal vocabulary suggests either sophisticated context-dependent communication or telepathic enhancement that supplements verbal expression with direct consciousness transfer. The Zagarian simulation technology that creates perfect replicas of entire realities while maintaining computational requirements that should exceed what any finite system could process, represents achievements in artificial reality. Creation that challenge basic assumptions about the relationship between information processing and conscious experience. Their ability to simulate Rick's consciousness with sufficient accuracy to fool even his analytical capabilities indicates understanding of neural architecture and awareness that approaches complete mastery over the mechanisms through which consciousness emerges from and depends upon physical substrates. The possibility that reality itself might represent artificial construction or controlled environment rather than natural universe creates philosophical paradoxes about the nature of authentic experience and the criteria that can distinguish genuine existence from sophisticated simulation, suggesting that the fundamental categories through which beings understand their existence might be inadequate for addressing questions about the ultimate nature of reality and consciousness within contexts where unlimited technological capability makes any distinction between real and artificial potentially meaningless. The ultimate mystery of cosmic entities lies not in cataloging their specific capabilities or analyzing their individual motivations, but in understanding how their existence reveals the fundamental inadequacy of human categories and concepts for comprehending the true scope and complexity of multiversal civilization, where beings whose nature transcends normal understanding operate according to purposes and principles that might be forever incomprehensible to consciousness, constrained by the limitations that define normal biological and technological development within finite realities where power and knowledge remain bounded by discoverable natural laws and logical constraints. The lasting effects of Rick Prime's multiversal rampage continue to reverberate across infinite realities long after his death at the hands of Rick C-137, creating cascading consequences that extend far beyond the immediate victims of his systematic campaign of destruction and abandonment to encompass entire civilizations whose development was altered by his casual interference in their natural evolution and social progress. The scope of Rick Prime's influence during his decades of interdimensional travel exceeded simple personal vendetta against alternate versions of himself to encompass wholesale disruption of technological development, political stability, and cultural advancement across countless realities whose inhabitants never understood the cosmic forces that had reshaped their existence according to the whims of a being whose godlike capabilities were matched only by his complete indifference to the suffering his actions produced. The technological artifacts and hidden research facilities that Rick Prime scattered throughout the multiverse during his campaign of cosmic terrorism represent potential sources of catastrophic disruption that could destabilize entire dimensional clusters if discovered by civilizations lacking the wisdom and restraint necessary to handle capabilities that exceed their current level of social and ethical development. The weapons, systems, consciousness, manipulation devices, and reality alteration technologies that Rick Prime developed and abandoned in various realities possess the potential to transform primitive civilizations into cosmic threats, or to eliminate advanced societies that lack adequate defenses against forms of warfare that operate beyond conventional understanding of physical and psychological combat. The question of whether Rick Prime created backup consciousness copies or alternative storage systems for preserving his essential identity and knowledge remains one of the most disturbing possibilities arising from his death, as his demonstrated mastery over consciousness, manipulation, and identity transfer suggests capabilities for achieving forms of immortality that would enable his continued existence, despite the apparent destruction of his primary physical form. The systematic nature of his operations and his obvious long-term planning abilities indicate strategic thinking that would likely include contingency measures for preserving his work and potentially his consciousness in forms that could enable future resurrection or continuation of his activities through alternative methods. The influence Rick Prime exerted on other Ricks through direct contact, technological exchange, and philosophical contamination created ideological and methodological changes that spread throughout Rick civilization, like intellectual viruses, corrupting the already flexible moral frameworks that most Ricks employed to justify their casual treatment of other beings, while introducing even more extreme approaches to problem-solving that treated genocide and reality, destruction, as acceptable tools for achieving personal objectives. The nihilistic philosophies and systematic cruelty that characterized Rick Prime's approach to existence provided validation and inspiration for Ricks who had previously maintained some constraints on their behavior through residual ethical considerations or practical concerns about long-term consequences. The families and civilizations that suffered direct intervention from Rick Prime during his multiversal travels carry psychological and cultural trauma that will influence their development for generations, as entire populations struggle to process experiences that exceed their conceptual frameworks for understanding suffering and injustice, while attempting to rebuild societies that were fundamentally altered by exposure to technologies and ideas that their natural development would not have encountered for centuries or millennia. The systematic nature of Rick Prime's destruction often eliminated not just individuals but entire categories of knowledge and cultural achievement that cannot be recovered through normal historical or archaeological investigation. The interdimensional criminal networks and black market organizations that arose to exploit the chaos and technological disruption that Rick Prime's activities created throughout the multiverse continue to operate according to business models that depend upon the systematic exploitation of realities that lack adequate defenses against multiversal predators who possess superior technology and knowledge. The weapons, technologies, and techniques that Rick Prime developed or demonstrated during his rampage became templates for countless imitators who lack his capabilities but possess sufficient understanding of his methods to cause significant damage within their more limited spheres of influence. The political instabilities that Rick Prime's interventions created in various realities continue to generate conflicts and social upheaval that affect billions of beings who have no awareness of the cosmic forces that reshaped their civilizations according to the strategic needs and psychological impulses of an interdimensional terrorist whose activities transcended normal categories of warfare and criminal behavior. The governmental collapses, technological disruptions, and social revolutions that followed Rick Prime's visits to various realities created power vacuums that enabled the rise of authoritarian regimes and criminal organizations that would not have achieved dominance under natural, historical development. The philosophical implications of Rick Prime's existence and ultimate death create existential questions about the nature of justice and accountability in contexts where individual beings can achieve capabilities that enable them to cause suffering on scales that exceed what entire civilizations could accomplish through conventional warfare or systematic oppression, raising fundamental issues about whether any form of punishment or retribution could be adequate for crimes that span infinite realities and affect countless generations of innocent victims who never had opportunity to defend themselves against threats they could not comprehend or predict. The possibility that Rick Prime's death truly ended his impact on the multiverse remains questionable given the systematic nature of his operations and the likelihood that he established autonomous systems and programmed followers who continue to execute his plans according to predetermined schedules that operate independently of his direct supervision or control. The long-term strategic thinking that characterized his approach to multiversal manipulation suggests planning horizons that extend far beyond individual lifespans and encompass objectives that might require decades or centuries to achieve full implementation regardless of his personal survival or continued involvement. The psychological scars that Rick Prime's campaign inflicted upon Rick C-137 represent perhaps his most successful achievement in terms of creating lasting damage that will continue to influence events and relationships long after his physical elimination, as the decades of trauma, obsession, and systematic dehumanization that Rick C-137 experienced during his hunt for revenge fundamentally altered his personality and moral framework in ways that make him nearly indistinguishable from the monster he sought to destroy. The transformation of Rick C-137 from grieving family man into cosmic-scale predator represents Rick Prime's ultimate victory over his alternate self. Despite his eventual defeat and death, the techniques for consciousness manipulation, reality alteration, and systematic psychological warfare that Rick Prime developed and employed throughout his multiversal campaign remain available for discovery and application by other beings who possess sufficient intelligence and moral flexibility to implement his methods according to their own objectives and psychological needs, ensuring that his influence will continue to spread throughout multiversal civilization through individuals who adopt his approaches to problem-solving and relationship management without necessarily understanding the full implications of the philosophical frameworks that justify such extreme measures. The lessons about power, revenge, and the corrupting influence of godlike capabilities that Rick Prime's existence demonstrates continue to provide cautionary examples about the inevitable progression from justified anger towards systematic evil that characterizes the development of individuals who achieve unlimited power while lacking the emotional wisdom and ethical constraints necessary to prevent such capabilities from being perverted into instruments of cosmic-scale destruction and oppression that ultimately serve no purpose beyond the psychological satisfaction of beings who have lost all connection to the values and relationships that once made their existence meaningful. The question of whether anyone can truly escape their worst impulses when granted unlimited power and freedom from consequence finds its most disturbing answer in Rick Prime's systematic transformation of justified grievance into cosmic-scale terrorism that exceeded anything his original injuries could rationally justify, demonstrating how trauma and capability can combine to create beings whose capacity for causing suffering transcends every normal category of evil, while maintaining the intellectual sophistication necessary to justify their actions through philosophical frameworks that treat cruelty as inevitable and compassion as naive self-deception that prevents optimal resource allocation and strategic effectiveness. The ultimate legacy of Rick Prime lies not in his specific achievements or the particular forms of suffering he inflicted upon his victims, but in his demonstration that intelligence without wisdom, power without responsibility, and capability without constraint inevitably produce outcomes that exceed conventional evil to achieve forms of cosmic horror that make normal concepts of justice and punishment seem inadequate for addressing the full scope of damage that results when beings achieve godlike capabilities while retaining fundamentally human limitations in emotional development and moral reasoning that prove insufficient for managing the responsibilities and temptations that accompany unlimited power over life and death across infinite realities, where every choice carries consequences that span generations and affect countless innocent beings who never chose to participate in conflicts that transcend their understanding and exceed their ability to defend themselves against threats that operate beyond their conceptual frameworks for comprehending danger and seeking protection through conventional means. And so we conclude our journey through the deepest mysteries of Rick and Morty's infinite cosmos where every answer leads to 10 new questions and every solution reveals greater complexities. From the central finite curve to the true nature of consciousness itself, these enigmas remind us that even infinite intelligence cannot solve every puzzle or heal every wound. Perhaps the greatest mystery isn't technical or cosmic, but deeply human. How connection and love persist despite trauma, how families endure across dimensions, and how hope survives, even in the face of infinite possibilities for despair. Rick's genius can traverse realities, but the simple mystery of why people choose to care for each other remains beautifully unsolvable. As you drift towards sleep, consider that some questions are more valuable than their answers. The mysteries we've explored tonight don't need resolution to provide meaning. They simply need to be contemplated, appreciated, and allowed to inspire wonder about the infinite complexity of existence itself. Rest now, knowing that in a multiverse full of questions, the peace you find in this moment is its own perfect answer. Sweet dreams in this mysterious, beautiful, endlessly puzzling cosmos we call home.